The stepmother forced her stepdaughter to get engaged to a beggar, aiming to humiliate her on the wedding day. However, the secret the beggar revealed that day left everyone in shock. The scorching sun of New York beat down mercilessly on Fifth Avenue, where Ethan, a 28-year-old man with unkempt hair and worn-out clothes, sat hunched on the sidewalk. His blue eyes, once full of life, now looked dull and weary, a reflection of his exhaustion and hunger. The sharp outline of his ribs beneath his torn shirt told the story of weeks spent with barely enough to eat. Ethan sat watching the bustling crowds rush past, feeling utterly invisible amidst the chaos. His stomach growled painfully, a brutal reminder that it had been over 2 days since his last meal. Just one more day, Ethan. Someone will notice you today, he whispered to himself, clinging to a fragile sliver of hope. But the voice in his mind was less forgiving. Who am I kidding? Nobody looks twice at a beggar. The bitterness in his thoughts stung. As the minutes dragged on, Ethan resisted the temptation to dig through the nearby trash cans for scraps. He had vowed never to sink that low, but hunger is a relentless tormentor. His eyes followed every passerby, especially those carrying bags of food or cups of coffee. The aroma of a hot dog being grilled at a nearby cart teased him cruelly, intensifying his hunger. Maybe I should try the shelter again. No, I can't. He shuddered, cutting the thought short, memories of a past visit too raw to revisit. Why did my life turn out this way? If only I had a family, a home. His mind drifted to the painful void of his past. As the hours crawled by, Ethan felt his despair deepen. He noticed other homeless individuals approaching strangers for spare change, but he couldn't bring himself to do the same. His pride, fragile but unbroken, wouldn't let him ask. Nearby, an older man with a weathered face and knowing eyes watched him. Kid, life can seem hopeless, but somehow, we make it through, the man said, his voice rough from years on the streets. I know, Ethan replied, his voice heavy with defeat. But sometimes it feels like this life will never change. We survive on the coins people toss us, but what we really need is a way out. Jobs, homes, food. Suddenly, as if fate had heard his silent plea, a middle-aged woman stopped in front of him. Without a word, she handed him a paper bag containing a still warm sandwich. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meat was almost too much to bear. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filling with gratitude. Thank you, ma'am. You have no idea how much this means to me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The woman gave him a soft smile and walked away, leaving Ethan stunned by her kindness. Maybe there's still good in the world. Maybe I'm not completely alone, he thought, feeling a faint flicker of hope. As he unwrapped the sandwich, Ethan noticed 2 other homeless men nearby. Their hollow faces mirrored his own suffering. Without hesitation, he broke the sandwich into 3 pieces and offered them to the others. Here, let's share this. No one should go hungry if we can help each other, he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. Across the street, 2 women watched the scene unfold. Olivia, a young woman with flowing brown hair and compassionate green eyes, felt a pang in her chest at the sight of Ethan's generosity. She stepped forward, ready to help, but her stepmother, Victoria, grabbed her arm sharply. Don't even think about it, Olivia. You are not mingling with them, Victoria snapped, her gray eyes cold and furious. But, Victoria, they need help. How can we just ignore them? Olivia protested, her voice trembling with emotion. Victoria dragged her toward a nearby luxury store, her high heels clicking against the pavement. The shimmering shop windows stood in stark contrast to the harsh reality across the street. Olivia resisted, her gaze lingering on Ethan and his companions. Victoria spun around, her face twisted in anger. Have you lost your mind? Those people are dangerous. They'd use any money for drugs or alcohol, she spat. You don't know that, Olivia fired back. That man just shared the only food he probably had. How can you be so heartless? Passers-by stopped to watch the heated exchange. Olivia, usually quiet and reserved, felt an unusual boldness rise within her. Pulling free from Victoria's grasp, she stepped onto the street. They're human beings, Victoria. They deserve compassion, not judgment, she said firmly. Victoria grabbed Olivia again, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her arm. You don't understand the real world, Olivia. They chose this life. It's not our job to save them.
Chose?
Olivia's voice cracked with frustration. No one chooses to be hungry or homeless. How can you not see that? She broke free once more, crossing the street with trembling hands. Reaching Ethan, she pulled some bills from her purse. Please take this. I hope it helps, she said softly, holding the money out to him. Ethan looked up, startled and moved by her gesture. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and an unspoken connection passed between them. Thank you, miss. Your kindness means more than I can say, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. It's nothing really. I just wish there was more I could do. Olivia mumbled, feeling a strange mix of relief and helplessness as she confronted the situation. From a distance, Victoria observed the scene. Her face was a blend of fury and something else, something colder, calculation. Her gray eyes fixed on Ethan with intent. There was something about him, something that reached beyond his ragged appearance. A plan started to form in her mind, one that could address multiple problems all at once. Olivia walked back to the sidewalk, bracing herself for the inevitable clash with her stepmother. But to her surprise, Victoria didn't lash out at her immediately. Instead, a chilling smile curled on her lips. Well, since you're so insistent on socializing with these people, maybe it's time I teach you a lesson about them. Don't you think? Victoria remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What are you up to, Victoria? Olivia asked, a sense of unease creeping over her as she sensed a shift in her stepmother's demeanor. As the two women walked away, Victoria shot a final glance at Ethan. Her eyes glinted with icy resolve, a plan taking root in her calculating mind. Olivia, still confused by Victoria's sudden change, didn't notice the look. She was lost in her own thoughts, replaying the brief encounter with Ethan. There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a kindness, that contrasted sharply with his apparent struggles. That young man. There's something different about him, don't you think? Victoria remarked casually, her voice laced with a curiosity that sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. Why the sudden interest, Victoria? Just a few minutes ago, you wanted me to completely ignore him. Olivia responded, her voice tinged with suspicion, as they approached the mansion. Victoria stormed inside, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors of the entry hall. Olivia followed in silence, still unsettled by the events of the afternoon. Robert, hearing the commotion, came out of his office, concern evident on his face. Without wasting time on pleasantries, Victoria spoke. Robert, your daughter is completely out of control today. She nearly associated with beggars on the street. Beggars? Her voice echoed off the walls, filled with disdain. Robert looked between Victoria and Olivia, confusion and disappointment settling over him. Olivia, is this true? He asked, his voice weary. Father, I was just trying to help someone in need. I don't see how that could be wrong, Olivia responded, her voice wavering slightly but firm in her conviction. Without another word, Victoria grabbed Robert's arm, yanked him into the office, and shut the door, leaving Olivia outside. Muffled voices carried through the thick wood. Can't you see the danger, Robert? She's damaging our reputation by mingling with society's outcasts. Victoria hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Robert sank into his leather chair, weary and overwhelmed, rubbing his face in exhaustion. Victoria, she has a good heart. We can't punish her for that, Robert countered weakly. A good heart in this world? That's a weakness we can't afford. Victoria shot back, her voice sharp as a knife. The argument escalated as Victoria reeled off a list of Olivia's recent offenses: donating to charities without approval, volunteering in impoverished areas, and avoiding the social events she was supposed to attend. Robert listened, his face growing paler with each word. She's ruining everything we've built, Robert. Our social standing, our connections. It's all at risk because of her obsession with helping the less fortunate. Victoria's voice dropped to a furious whisper. But she's my daughter, Victoria. I can't just change who she is. Robert protested, though his tone betrayed signs of resignation. Victoria halted her pacing, suddenly turning to face Robert with an unsettling gleam in her eyes. I have a plan, she said, her voice suddenly calm, her demeanor controlled. A plan that will solve both of our problems. Robert sat up straighter in his chair, his senses on alert. He recognized that tone, it never boded well. What kind of plan? He asked cautiously, his fear beginning to grow. A plan that will teach Olivia a lesson, Victoria replied, a cold smile playing on her lips. Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Robert looked at her, torn between fear and curiosity. He knew he should protest, defend his daughter, but years of Victoria's manipulation had worn him down. What exactly are you thinking? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. Victoria leaned in, her eyes gleaming with a manic energy. That beggar Olivia was so eager to help. What if we used him to show her that people like him aren't what they seem? What if she had to witness firsthand how bad people like him can be? Her words dripped with malice. Victoria, what are you suggesting? Robert asked, a chill running down his spine. Victoria abruptly stood, casting a long shadow over Robert. She walked over to the window, her gaze sweeping over the manicured garden outside, a cold smile forming on her lips. Marriage, she said, her voice laced with cruel satisfaction. I'll make Robert force Olivia to marry that beggar. Robert choked on his whiskey, eyes wide with disbelief. You've lost your mind, Victoria. That's monstrous, he exclaimed, rising from his chair. Monstrous? No, my dear, it's a lesson she needs. Think about it. What better way to show Olivia the harsh reality of the world than by making her live with someone like him? Victoria replied, her tone calculated and icy. Robert began to pace back and forth across the office, his hands running through his graying hair in frustration. But what about her happiness? My daughter deserves more than this, Victoria, he argued, his voice firm, though his concern was evident. Victoria turned to face him, her eyes gleaming with a cold determination. Happiness? Robert, we're talking about your daughter's future here. Think about the looks, the whispers at social events. Olivia needs to learn that there are consequences to her careless actions, she said, each word laced with conviction. This doesn't feel right, Victoria. My daughter would never be ashamed of a man simply because of his status. She has a good heart. Something like this wouldn't bother her, don't you think? Robert questioned, a flicker of pride in his voice as he reflected on his daughter's strength of character. Victoria let out a sharp, humorless laugh, her voice echoing coldly in the office. Oh, Robert, do you honestly think she could handle this? She may be kind-hearted, but she's still a girl, raised in luxury. A few days living with that beggar, and she'll be begging to change her mind. She scoffed, brushing aside Robert's concerns with a dismissive wave. Robert leaned against the desk, the weight of Victoria's proposal heavy on his shoulders. And what about the young man? How do we convince him to go along with this farce? He asked, skepticism clear in his voice. Money, dear. We'll offer him an amount he can't refuse. For someone in his position, it will be an offer he can't turn down, Victoria responded, her voice dripping with confidence. The office fell silent, the tension palpable. Robert stared into the void, his mind a swirling storm of conflicting emotions. His love for Olivia and concern for her well-being clashed with his fear of the social fallout this plan could bring. I don't know, Victoria. This feels like it's going too far. Can't we just talk to her? He finally murmured, doubt clouding his words. Victoria moved closer to him, her tone softening but still unwavering. Robert, dear, words won't be enough. Olivia needs to see things for herself. Sometimes, we must be tough to protect those we love, she argued, a mix of persuasion and false compassion in her voice. Yes, but forcing her into a marriage? Playing with my daughter's life like this? There must be another way. Robert protested, his gaze revealing the internal struggle he was facing. Robert slowly stood up, walking over to the window, his gaze lost in the complex world outside, one that seemed full of traps for his precious daughter. With a deep sigh, he turned to Victoria. "This won't end well, Victoria. You're underestimating Olivia and the strength of her convictions," he murmured, genuine concern in his voice. Victoria crossed her arms, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Your hesitation is exactly why Olivia is out of control. Sometimes we have to make tough decisions. You're her father. You need to teach her to protect her reputation," she insisted, her voice sharp. As the sun began to set over the city park, painting the sky with warm hues of orange and pink, Ethan sat on a worn-out bench, watching people pass by. An elegant figure in a designer coat and high heels approached, clearly out of place in that setting. She stopped in front of Ethan, her cold gaze assessing him from head to toe. "You're the beggar from earlier, aren't you?" she asked with a measured tone. "I'm Victoria, Olivia's stepmother, the woman who helped you earlier, and who's now with me." Ethan stood up, confused and somewhat defensive. "Yes, that's me.
I'm Ethan."
"What do you want, ma'am?" he replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I have a proposal for you, one that could completely change your life," Victoria declared, a calculating smile forming on her lips. Without wasting any time, Victoria explained her plan to Ethan, detailing the arranged marriage with Olivia and promising him a life of comfort and luxury in exchange for his cooperation. Ethan listened, his eyes widening with each word. "You're asking me to marry your stepdaughter? The kind woman who helped me today, all for money?" he asked, incredulous. Victoria nodded, her smile unwavering. "Think about it, Ethan. You'd never have to worry about food or shelter again. You'd have everything you've ever dreamed of," she pressed, her voice smooth and persuasive, like the hiss of a serpent. "I can't accept this. I can't use someone like that, especially someone who's been kind to me," Ethan responded, shaking his head in firm refusal. Victoria's irritation was clear, but she kept her composure. Shifting tactics, she appealed to another side of Ethan. "Think of the possibilities, Ethan. With this money, you could help so many people. Your friends on the streets, those who go hungry every day," she suggested, her voice low and persuasive. Ethan hesitated, his hands clenching into fists as Victoria's words began to sink in. The image of his street companions, hungry and desperate, flashed in his mind. I could really make a difference," he murmured to himself, more than to Victoria. "Imagine how many lives you could change. Isn't that what Olivia would do? Use her resources to help others." Victoria pressed, sensing his hesitation. Ethan's gaze shifted to her coat, lingering on the gold brooch pinned to the lapel. The intricate design, a rose entwined with vines, stirred something in Ethan, a distant memory that seemed just out of reach. He reached out involuntarily, his fingers nearly brushing the brooch. "This brooch, I've seen it before," he whispered, his voice trembling with an unfamiliar emotion. Victoria stepped back, momentarily surprised by Ethan's reaction. "It's just an old family jewel. Nothing special," she said quickly, her hand protectively covering the brooch. "How strange. I'm sure I remember this brooch. Someone wore it, a woman singing to me." Ethan thought to himself, struggling to piece together the fragments of his past. "Shall we go?" Victoria pressed, gesturing for Ethan to follow. "I'm sure you'll help so many with this decision." Ethan nodded silently before they left. As they drove away, Ethan turned to his companions on the street, promising to return with help. "Don't worry, I'll be back. I'll find a way to help all of you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Later, as he sat in the car, surrounded by the smell of new leather, he couldn't stop thinking about the strange familiarity of Victoria's brooch and the surreal proposal she had made. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, but if this can help others, maybe it's worth it," Ethan murmured to himself, nervously drumming his fingers on his knee. A few minutes later, Victoria's opulent car silently glided through the mansion gates, its grandeur looming ahead. Ethan, sitting in the back, stared in awe at the massive house. Olivia, sitting by her bedroom window with a book in hand, heard the sound of the car approaching and looked out, curious. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw Ethan stepping out of the vehicle, looking out of place and anxious in his worn clothes. What's going on? Why did Victoria bring him here? This can't be good. Did she do something to him? Olivia murmured to herself, a sense of confusion and dread building as her heart began to race. Victoria led Ethan into the house. She shot a knowing glance at Olivia, who was watching from the window. "Wait here," she instructed Ethan, leaving him in the entrance hall before heading up the stairs with determination. Victoria knocked on Olivia's bedroom door before entering without waiting for a response. "Olivia, dear, we need to talk," she announced, her voice unnervingly sweet. Olivia turned to face her stepmother, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Victoria, what's going on? Why is he here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Everything will become clear soon, my dear. But first, sit down. We have a lot to discuss," Victoria replied, gesturing for Olivia to sit on the edge of the bed. Reluctantly, Olivia obeyed, her gaze never leaving Victoria's face. As Victoria began pacing around the room, the sound of her heels clicking on the wooden floor was the only noise. "Olivia, your obsession with helping the less fortunate has been worrying. Your father and I have decided it's time for you to learn a valuable lesson about the real world," Victoria began, her voice laced with fake concern. Olivia's stomach twisted. What is she talking about? She wondered, dreading the answer. "I'm talking about consequences, dear. And a marriage," Victoria replied, a cold smile curling at her lips. The shock hit Olivia like a punch to the stomach. She stood up quickly, her hands shaking. "Marriage? What marriage?" she demanded, her voice rising in disbelief. Victoria stopped pacing and turned to face her. "You're going to marry the beggar downstairs, Ethan. The one you were so eager to help today," she declared, savoring each word with cruel pleasure. Olivia's face drained of color. "This is insane. She can't be serious." "You can't be serious," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "Oh, but I am, dear. Very serious. And before you even think about refusing, let me explain the consequences of your non-cooperation," Victoria threatened, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. Olivia staggered back and sank onto the bed, her mind spinning. "I only helped a man in need. What did I do wrong?" She tried to steady her breath. "You can't force me to do this. It's illegal. It's immoral," she argued, frustration beginning to choke her voice, tears welling in her eyes. Victoria moved closer, leaning down to look Olivia straight in the eye. "I can, and I will, dear, unless you want to see your new beggar friend face very serious charges. It would be a real shame if the police found something illegal in his possession, don't you think?" she said, each word dripping with malice. "You wouldn't do that. He's innocent. He has nothing to do with this," Olivia stammered, fear gripping her heart as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Why are you doing this, Victoria? What do you gain from all of this?" Olivia asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Victoria's smile turned colder as she straightened up. "What I gain here, Olivia, is a daughter-in-law who finally understands her place in this family and in society. You're going to learn that your actions have consequences, and that not everyone you try to help deserves your compassion." Olivia felt trapped, her gaze drifting toward the window where she had seen Ethan arrive. The thought of him suffering because of her made her sick. "And if I accept, what happens to Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He will have a comfortable life, far from the streets. And you, my dear, will learn a valuable lesson about the real world," Victoria replied, her tone almost maternal, though it was laced with an underlying coldness that made Olivia shiver. Ethan was shown to a luxurious bathroom attached to his new room. His eyes widened at the sight of the large marble bathtub and the neatly arranged toiletries on the counter. "Everything you need is here," said the butler, gesturing to the soft towels and shaving products. Ethan nodded, still in shock from the whole situation. Once alone, he turned on the faucet, watching the hot water fill the tub. "How long has it been since my last real bath?" he murmured to himself as he slowly began removing his tattered clothes. "Will all this dirt come off? Do I even remember how to take a proper bath?" Anxiety mixed with anticipation as he stepped into the steaming water. A deep sigh of relief escaped Ethan as he sank into the tub. Years of grime slowly began to wash away as he scrubbed himself with a soft sponge and scented soap. He submerged his head under the water, scrubbing his hair repeatedly. The water darkened quickly, a silent witness to the years he had spent on the streets. Ethan stayed in the tub until the water cooled, savoring every moment of cleanliness and comfort. "It's like being reborn," he whispered to himself, marveling at the clean skin he hadn't seen in years. Who would have thought a simple bath could make someone feel so human again? He reflected, a wave of emotion flooding through him as he wrapped himself in a soft towel. Standing in front of the foggy mirror, Ethan gazed at his reflection. His beard, long and unkempt, obscured much of his face. Trembling hands picked up the razor and shaving cream. With great care, he began to shave, slowly revealing the face he had forgotten. Each stroke of the razor felt like it was not just removing the hair, but also peeling away layers of his past life on the streets. When he finished, Ethan barely recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. "My God, is that really me?" he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. He murmured, running his fingers over his now smooth cheeks. "It's like looking at a stranger from the past," he thought, a wave of shock and fascination overtaking him. Dressed in the new clothes that had been left for him, Ethan felt like an imposter. The soft, finely tailored fabric was a sharp contrast to the rags he was accustomed to. He adjusted the collar of the shirt, uncomfortable with the sensation of being properly dressed, taking one last glance at his reflection in the mirror. Taking a deep breath, he braced himself to face what was ahead. "You can do this. With a life like this, you'll be able to help so many people," he whispered to his reflection, trying to reassure himself. As he descended the stairs, Ethan felt every eye in the room turn toward him. At the bottom of the stairs, Olivia froze, visibly shocked when she saw him. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. "Ethan, I almost didn't recognize you," she whispered, her voice a mix of surprise and something else he couldn't quite place. Victoria appeared then, her gaze sweeping over Ethan with clear disdain. "Oh, excellent. At least you cleaned up well," she remarked, her tone overly cheerful, but dripping with insincerity. Ethan nodded, unable to find words as they made their way toward the dining room. He couldn't help but notice Olivia's gaze lingering on him. What is she thinking? Ethan wondered, feeling more exposed than he ever had, even during his time on the streets. "Why is she looking at me like that?" he questioned, feeling a strange vulnerability that was completely new to him. The days passed in a blur of frantic preparations and rising tension. Now, sitting in the chair of the luxurious beauty salon, Olivia stared at her reflection in the mirror, the hairstylist carefully arranging her elaborate bridal hairstyle. Though her eyes were tinged with sadness, there was a quiet resolve in them as her hands rested gently on the white dress in her lap. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and the extraordinary transformation he had gone through in just a few days. He must be feeling as lost as I am. Maybe this marriage could be the chance to truly help him. Perhaps this is my opportunity to make the difference I've always wanted to make. Olivia murmured to herself, her heart tightening with empathy, a small smile forming on her lips. Noticing Olivia's pensive expression, the hairstylist attempted to break the silence with some casual conversation. "Are you excited for the big day, miss?" she asked gently. Olivia hesitated for a moment, before replying, "It's complicated, but I'm determined to make the best of it." She met the stylist's gaze in the mirror as her mind wandered to the quiet moments she had shared with Ethan during the past days. Those shy smiles, the hesitant conversations, and the gratitude shining in his eyes. He deserves a chance to rebuild his life. Maybe together, we can find a greater purpose in all this. Olivia reflected as the stylist finished the final touches on her hair. Olivia's gaze drifted to the activities in the salon through the mirror, her thoughts turning to all the people out there who needed help, just like Ethan. Her mind began to work, formulating plans on how she could use her position and resources to make a real difference, even within the confines of her arranged marriage. "Are you satisfied with the result, miss?" the hairstylist asked, snapping Olivia from her thoughts. "It's perfect. Thank you," Olivia replied, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "This could be the beginning of something important," she added mentally, feeling a surge of determination. At that moment, Olivia overheard a fragment of a conversation between two nearby staff members. "That's Victoria's stepdaughter. Do you remember the scandal involving her stepmother?" one whispered. The other nodded and leaned closer. "How could I forget? They say she was involved in something terrible, though they never proved anything." The conversation was abruptly cut short when the women noticed Olivia's gaze in the mirror. They quickly backed away, looking guilty. Olivia's heart raced, anxiety building up within her. What was Victoria involved in? She wondered, the weight of uncertainty pressing on her. "She claims she loved joining our family, but she acts like she hates me," Olivia thought, her mind racing. The words of the staff members echoed in her head, mixing with her own observations over the past few days. Especially the parts of Victoria's past she seemed so reluctant to discuss before marrying Robert. There was a puzzle there, and Olivia was determined to solve it. Walking over to the salon window, Olivia's reflection in the glass no longer just showed a bride, but a woman with a purpose. "I'm going to find out the truth. If Victoria is hiding something, I'll uncover it," she promised herself, her expression resolute. Hours later, the afternoon sun bathed the imposing facade of the church as a procession of luxurious cars began to arrive. Ethan, still feeling uncomfortable in the suit that now adorned his body, nervously watched from the entrance. The guests, members of high society, stepped out of their vehicles, casting curious and judgmental glances his way. Whispers filled the air, words like beggar and scandal reaching his ears. Ethan's stomach churned as the reality of the situation hit him with full force. "How did I end up here? Why do these people look so disgusted when they see me? Does Olivia think the same way?" he murmured to himself, adjusting his tie as he desperately searched the crowd for a friendly face. An elderly couple walked past him, and the woman, unable to hide her expression of disdain, whispered loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Dear, did you hear? Victoria said he was living on the streets until last week." What a humiliation for poor Olivia. Her companion nodded, glancing at Ethan with clear disdain. "They say it's some kind of punishment, but exposing the family like this, mingling with people like him?" Olivia must have lost her mind. The blood drained from Ethan's face, the words hitting him like a punch to the stomach. Victoria had intentionally spread his story, turning him into a spectacle to humiliate Olivia in front of everyone. "So that's it? I'm just a tool to humiliate Olivia? How could I have been so naive?" Anger and shame twisted together in his chest. More guests continued to arrive, each look and whispered comment heightening Ethan's discomfort. He spotted Victoria from across the room, greeting the guests with her fake smile, occasionally casting triumphant glances in his direction. Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to resist the urge to confront her right then and there. A gentle hand on his shoulder startled him. It was Robert, Olivia's father. His eyes were filled with a mixture of pity and guilt. "Ethan, I'm sorry for all of this," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Before Ethan could respond, Robert had already turned and moved away, swallowed by the crowd. Even her father seems to be a victim in this twisted game, Ethan reflected, his mind racing. An elderly gentleman, leaning on an ornate cane, approached Ethan. His eyes widened as he took a closer look. A look of shock and recognition flashed across the elderly man's wrinkled face. "It can't be," he murmured, studying Ethan's features intently. For a moment, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, thinking that perhaps this man wouldn't judge him for his past. The elderly man glanced around nervously, as though fearing someone might be watching, before leaning closer to Ethan. "Young man, I need to speak with you in private. It's urgent," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Surprised and intrigued, Ethan nodded slowly. "Of course, sir. But why? Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice low and filled with anxiety. The elderly man cast another cautious glance around, ensuring no one was near, before responding. "Not here. Meet me at the back of the church in 5 minutes. There are things you need to know," he said, moving away with surprising speed for his age, leaning heavily on his cane. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his heart racing. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to click together, but the picture they formed was more disturbing and intriguing than he could have imagined. What's going on here? Who is this man, and what does he want to tell me? Ethan thought, his mind spinning with possibilities. Soon after, the elderly man revealed everything Ethan needed to know. In a daze, Ethan made his way back into the church. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the guests took their seats. Standing at the altar, Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The old man's revelation was still fresh in his mind, and he anxiously scanned the church entrance, determined to follow through with the plan for Olivia's sake. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Reverend Mitchell cast a concerned glance at Ethan, noticing the strain in his expression. "Is everything all right, young man?" the Reverend whispered. Ethan only nodded, jaw clenched with resolve. "I need to stay strong. Olivia deserves to know the truth. But not like this. Not here. I won't abandon her at the altar," he thought, feeling the weight of his newfound knowledge. "Everything's fine, Reverend," he replied, just as the music began to play, and all heads turned toward the church entrance. Olivia appeared, radiant in her wedding dress, but her eyes told a different story. Fear and determination mixed in her gaze as she slowly walked down the aisle. To Ethan, it seemed like each step she took was a battle, as if she were marching toward an uncertain future. Victoria, seated in the front row, watched the scene with a smile of satisfaction that now felt more sinister to Ethan. "If only she knew what I know now, how everything will change when the truth is revealed." His eyes locked onto Olivia as she reached the altar. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Two souls silently united against the forces that sought to control them. Reverend Mitchell began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the church, but to Ethan, the words felt distant, overshadowed by the weight of the secret he now carried. "Hold on, Ethan. Everything will come to light at the right moment," he reminded himself. The ceremony proceeded, each word from the Reverend increasing the tension in the air. Finally, the critical moment arrived. "If anyone has any reason why this marriage should not take place, speak now or forever hold your peace," the Reverend announced. A heavy silence fell over the church, and Ethan felt his body tense. The truth he had learned was burning in his throat, desperate to be released. But he fought the urge to speak, knowing that the moment was not yet right. To everyone's shock, Victoria suddenly stood up. "I have something to say," she declared, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. What is she doing? Could she know I've discovered the truth? Panic began to stir in him. Victoria strode down the central aisle, her heels echoing in the stunned silence. She positioned herself in front of the altar with a cruel smile, facing the congregation. "Dear guests," she began, her voice dripping with insincere sweetness, "I believe everyone deserves to know the truth about this wedding." Her eyes turned to Olivia, who stood frozen, pale and in shock. "This young woman," Victoria continued, pointing at Olivia, "thought she could defy our social standing by mingling with the scum of the streets. Well, here is the result of her foolish compassion." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Victoria, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. It's too late for please, dear," Victoria snapped, her tone as sharp as a knife. "You brought this on yourself." Victoria turned to the congregation, arms spread wide in a theatrical gesture. "Look, my friends, This is the bride who chose to marry a beggar, a man who, until last week, lived on the streets, dirty and hungry. Murmurs of shock and disapproval rippled through the church. Ethan stood still, his fists clenched at his sides, rage boiling within him. Victoria continued her ruthless tirade. This is what happens when someone forgets their place, when they refuse to honor the traditions and expectations of our society. Finally, Robert stood up, his voice trembling with indignation. "Victoria, that's enough," he shouted. "How can you do this to my daughter?" he demanded, outraged. "Your daughter?" Victoria laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "She chose this path, Robert. Now she must face the consequences." Olivia's face burned with humiliation, but something in her eyes changed. A spark of defiance ignited within her, replacing the initial shock. She stepped forward, ready to confront Victoria, but before she could speak, Ethan moved. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Olivia and Victoria, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Enough! Enough of your lies, Victoria," he said, his voice low but firm. The entire church seemed to hold its breath. Victoria took a step back, startled by Ethan's sudden intervention. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her control slipping. Ethan stared directly into her eyes. Years of secrets and manipulation were on the verge of being exposed. "I'm telling the truth you've hidden for so long," he replied, his voice gaining strength. The silence in the church was deafening as Ethan took another step forward, his gaze unflinching. He drew in a deep breath, gathering the courage for what he was about to reveal. When he finally spoke, his voice rang out with certainty, echoing through the walls of the church. "The time for truth has come. Victoria, you thought you could bury the past, but it always finds a way to surface. My real name is Hudson Howard, though that name feels strange to me now, since I've spent years using the name I was given on the streets. This is the name I was baptized with. I am the son of Jonathan Howard, Victoria's first husband." Ethan continued, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the revelation. "A few minutes ago, an elderly man approached me. He told me a story that, although I couldn't remember, deeply resonated within me. He spoke of a child, the son of a wealthy man who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. That child was me." Ethan paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He recognized my birthmark, the same one he had seen on Jonathan Howard's son before he vanished without a trace. But when he learned my story, living on the streets, he was able to connect the dots. "Victoria, you were my father's second wife. When he died under mysterious circumstances, you inherited everything. But that wasn't enough for you. I was an obstacle, the legitimate heir who stood in the way of your newly acquired wealth and status." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Victoria. "So, you made a decision that would change our lives forever. You abandoned me in a nearby town, erasing my existence from your carefully constructed life. I was too young to remember much, and everyone believed your fabricated story of my disappearance. The disappearance of Hudson. For years, I lived on the streets, never understanding why I always felt out of place in the world." Ethan's voice grew more intense as he spoke. "But something always drew me back to this city. It was as if, unconsciously, I knew I belonged here, even though I couldn't remember why. That brought you here, Victoria. I remembered it, the object I clung to as a child, the one thing I could hold on to when you left me on the street. It was the only memory I had left. And yet, you didn't recognize me when you saw me again on the street. Ironic, isn't it?" He shook his head, anger creeping into his tone. "The reason you despise beggars so much, Victoria, is because deep down, they remind you of what you did. Every time you looked at one of us, you saw the boy you abandoned." Ethan stepped closer, his words sharp and cutting. "When you brought me into this house, into this cruel charade you orchestrated, you didn't realize you were bringing back the past you tried so hard to bury." Turning to Olivia, who stood in shock, Ethan's expression softened. "Olivia, your kindness and compassion gave me the strength to face this truth. Your act of generosity that day on the street gave me the courage to help someone else in need. Ethan's voice grew steadier, though still laced with anger. Victoria, your obsession with social status, your disdain for the less fortunate, your cruelty disguised as life lessons. Now it all makes sense. It was all an elaborate facade to hide your past, to bury the truth of what you did to me and my father. But no more. The truth has come to light, and you can no longer hide behind your lies and manipulations. He turned back to face Victoria, his voice filled with finality. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions, to answer for the life you stole from me and the pain you caused to so many others, including Olivia and Robert. I stand here today not as the broken man you thought you could use in your schemes, but as Ethan Howard, reclaiming my identity and my rightful place in the world. Ethan's eyes burned with determination. And I'm here to ensure that justice is finally served. When Ethan finished speaking, the church erupted into chaos. Olivia stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as the full impact of Ethan's words sank in. Victoria, pale and trembling, seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth finally revealed. Robert stepped away from his wife, his face a mask of shock, as though seeing her for the first time, and not liking what he saw. In the days following the dramatic revelation, the lives of everyone involved had changed in ways they could never have anticipated. Ethan, determined to prove his identity beyond any doubt, underwent a DNA test with a distant relative of the Howard family. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for the results. On a sunny afternoon, Ethan, Olivia, and Robert gathered in the family lawyer's office. The lawyer opened the envelope containing the test results with trembling hands. "It's positive," the lawyer announced, his voice ringing out in the stunned silence. "Ethan is, without a doubt, the long-lost son of Jonathan Howard." Olivia squeezed Ethan's hand, her tears of relief and happiness shining in her eyes. Robert, still processing everything, placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. Finally, after so many years, the truth has come to light. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "It's good to take off the blindfold and see that, despite everything, we can still find happiness." The consequences for Victoria were swift and severe. Accused of fraud, manipulation, and possible involvement in Jonathan Howard's death, she faced a lengthy legal battle. In the days that followed, the police arrived at the mansion with a search and seizure warrant. Victoria, still in shock, watched helplessly as officers searched every room, confiscating documents, computers, and even her precious brooch, now a key piece of evidence. The prosecutor, eager to make an example of someone so influential, pushed for a full investigation into Jonathan's mysterious death, which had been ruled an accident years ago. High society, which had once revered Victoria, now avoided her as though she were a plague. Her social empire crumbled as quickly as it had been built. Her phone stopped ringing, and invitations to charity events and exclusive dinners disappeared overnight. Former friends turned their backs when they saw her on the street, fearing any association with her would tarnish their own reputations. Victoria's assets were frozen as the investigation continued, leaving her without access to the resources she once considered endless. The mansion, which she had turned into her personal castle, now felt like a gilded prison, with reporters camped outside, eager for a glimpse of the disgraced socialite. In an ironic twist, Victoria found herself alone and isolated, experiencing a fraction of the helplessness she had inflicted on Ethan so many years ago. As the evidence mounted and more details of her manipulations came to light, it became clear that she would face not only social ruin, but also the very real prospect of spending years behind bars. Meanwhile, Ethan and Olivia grew even closer, bonded by the adversity they had faced together in an intimate ceremony very different from the spectacle Victoria had planned. They got married. This time there was no manipulation or ulterior motives, just true love and a shared desire to make a difference in the world. "Ethan," Olivia said, holding the hands of her now husband, "what do you think about using our combined fortunes to help people who are in the situation you once were?" Ethan's eyes lit up with emotion and determination. "Nothing would make me happier, my love." let's turn this tragedy into something positive. In the months that followed, Ethan and Olivia established a foundation dedicated to helping the homeless and abandoned children. They worked tirelessly to provide shelter, education, and opportunities for those whom society often forgets. Robert, deeply regretful for his unintentional role in Victoria's schemes, actively joined the couple's charitable efforts. Ethan's story from beggar to long-lost heir, and his subsequent philanthropic work captured the public's imagination. He became a symbol of hope and redemption, proving that it is possible to overcome even the most adverse circumstances. One quiet evening, as they watched the sunset from their porch, Ethan turned to Olivia. For years I felt lost, like I was searching for something I couldn't name. Now I realized I was searching for this: a home, a purpose, someone to love. Olivia smiled, snuggling closer to him. And to think it all started with a simple act of kindness on the street. Never underestimate the power of helping someone. Ethan can change the world. And so what began as a cruel plot of revenge and humiliation turned into a story of love, redemption, and hope. Ethan and Olivia, united by unimaginable adversity, dedicated their lives to turning the pain of the past into a brighter future for others. The Howard Harrison Foundation, established by the couple, quickly became a powerful force for change in the city. Shelters for the homeless were opened, offering not just a roof, but also rehabilitation programs and job training. Abandoned children found loving homes through carefully supervised adoption programs. Each year, dozens of young people received scholarships, giving them the chance to escape the cycle of poverty that Ethan knew all too well. The impact of their work spread like ripples in a pond. Other wealthy families, inspired by Ethan and Olivia's example, began to reevaluate their own priorities. The city, once known for its indifferent elite, gained a new reputation for compassion and social progress. Ethan, the lost boy who became a symbol of resilience, frequently spoke at schools and universities, sharing his story and encouraging others to never lose hope. Olivia, in turn, used her social connections to garner support for causes that had previously been ignored by high society. Together, they proved that the true value of a person is not in their social status or bank account, but in their ability to reach out and lift others up. Their story became a powerful reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, kindness can prevail, and that a single act of compassion can spark profound change. As the years passed, Ethan and Olivia looked back with a mixture of wonder and gratitude for the journey that had brought them to where they were. What began with a simple gesture of kindness on a busy street had transformed into a movement that changed lives. They continued their work, tireless in their determination to make the world a better place. One act of kindness at a time, proving that true love and compassion have the power to overcome even the deepest darkness. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing you heartwarming stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We are incredibly grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, full of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.